Welcome to #Analytics. This is a glimpse into the conversation between two individuals, one that's super passionate, one that's super opinionated, both around the topic of analytics. Luke, what's our topic this week?
Yeah, so our topic is, well, before we jump into that, let's set the context for it, is that both Ann and I were at conferences just last week, so it is conferences.
Yay! It is conferences, and I think we should do ourselves a solid and introduce ourselves. I'll start off. I'm Ann Jackson. I'm an analytics evangelist. You can follow me on Twitter at AnnUJackson or on my website, jackson2.com. Luke, myself, and one other individual, Roddy Zakovich, also facilitate Workout Wednesday, which is a weekly challenge to boost your skills in Tableau and data visualization. So we encourage you to check that out as well.
And I'm Luke Stanky. I am an expert in all things data science, data visualization, and somewhat of an expert of things happening in the cloud. You can follow me on Twitter at Luke Stanky.
Awesome. So conferences. Yes, I think the perfect storm, right, Luke? We were both at conferences at the same week and time. I remember going through this. We were texting each other feverishly during our downtime. So what conference did you attend?
Yeah, so I got to actually go to two conferences. One was Eyeo. It's in Minneapolis. It happens once a year where people come together from art, data, creative technologies, and it's essentially workshops that are led by passionate thinkers and makers. And the conference is about art, creative coding, data visualization, machine learning, experience design, interactive art, architecture, culture, privacy, and ethics. So covering a ton of different stuff. And this is, again, I live in Minneapolis, so it's happening in my own backyard. And all these leaders from these different areas are coming together to converge, socialize, and then take action. We also had a more local conference. So Eyeo is definitely this national conference where people are coming together, but we also have this local conference called Big Data Tech. It's hosted by MinneAnalytics, which is a nonprofit in Minnesota that is focused on events in analytics and data science, and it has more than 12,000 members. And this Big Data Tech conference has over 1,000 people attend it locally. And those topics range from artificial intelligence to distributed platforms to how-tos on various technologies. And it's free. That's one of the best parts, but it sells out in less than 5 days every year. So really high demand for this local conference. And to be honest, it's one of the best conferences I get to go to every year. Anne, where'd you go?
So I got to go to Alteryx Inspire conference, so Alteryx analytics platform that's trying to, I'd say, disrupt the analytics space by having mini drag and drop tools to make things like data prep and blending, data integration, connecting to multiple data sources much easier. They're dabbling pretty deeply in the data science space as well. So that was in Anaheim, California. Roughly 3,000 people in attendance. I want to say it was 3 or 4 days total. It's the second time that I've been to the Alteryx Inspire conference, and it's a really nice conference from a data practitioner perspective because 3,000 people is not a ton of people, and it's kind of awesome because I was introduced to Alteryx by virtue of a Tableau user group. I've been using Alteryx for about 2.5 years, so it's always nice to see what I would call sort of a younger product in the analytics space, see how they are evolving over time.
That's pretty cool. So it's really interesting. We went to 3 different conferences in 1 week, and one was definitely focused on a tool or a technology, which is Alteryx itself. The other was design focused. It was also about bringing together individuals across multiple communities and coming together. And then there was this the idea of, with big data tech, growing locally rather than from a national perspective. So it kind of covers off a whole bunch of different types of conferences.
Yeah. So, I'd like to talk about why did you go? So Luke, why did you go to Eyeo and the Big Data Conference?
Well, I mean, they were happening locally for me, but that's really not just because they were local. I looked at Eyeo, and it's something that I've always wanted to go to. And the conference, so the conference size for Eyeo is about 1,000 individuals as well. It's 4 days long, and I think a lot of it was, how can I sort of learn from others who are practicing in analogous fields or homogeneous fields, and kind of understand their approach to what's going on, and how they do their work. Right, a lot of the individuals that were there were actually they were their background is in design, and then they come in and they approach data after that with this deep design background. I feel like my background is in statistics, it's in mathematics, so I end up taking my understanding of how data works, and in order to make it accessible for people, I approach design. So this is very much a situation where I'm trying to learn how other individuals are thinking about their processes in order to solve their own problems that they're working with. And it, I think everybody's process is a little different, and that's what makes this unique for me. And then MinneAnalytics, Big Data Tech, hosted by MinneAnalytics. I went to this one for a much different reason. It's local, and I work for a company called Slalom, and we're always looking for the best people to hire, and it's really hard to sometimes find the hidden gems that exist within the area, within our networks, because often our networks we think as being a widespread, but they're just not. And it's a great opportunity for any individual to connect and find a potentially a new job or a career in this case, consulting. And it really takes just 15 to 20 minutes of talking with someone, and you can kind of understand their approach in problem solving, because that's what consulting is. It's just how do you solve a problem in a reasonable way, and just understanding people's thought processes in a short period of time at a conference, nonetheless, is a really easy way to find awesome people.
Cool. And so I would say that I went to the Alteryx conference for a couple reasons. One, I got a pretty cheap ticket, so figured I might as well go. I always like to see my friends in the data industry, and this is a great chance to kind of break out of what I would call typical day-to-day routines and do something completely different. There were a few folks that I had met online this year that I haven't yet had the opportunity to spend time in person getting to know, and that was one of the big things, especially as someone who just started my own analytics practice and firm. I thought it was important for me to go meet with other industry leaders and people that are in a similar space as me, trying to navigate the world of going independent. And kind of to that point, I think Alteryx is a tool that's been something that's constantly on my radar. I try to approach things from the business user perspective back towards analytics and IT. I think Alteryx is doing a really great job from a platform perspective of enabling people. So I wanted to see what the evolution of that looked like, which I kind of mentioned already, and understand the types of people, the personas, the people that are currently customers. What I want to do is bring analytics to as many people as possible. So figuring out the types of people that can leverage Alteryx is critically important.
But you mentioned that there's like 3,000 people that go to this conference, which is kind of crazy. Like, how do you focus your time? And this is where I get lost at the conference, because really when I go, the company I work for, Slalom, is really large. It's got 5,000 consultants, and there's about 100 plus that if I would go to any conference, larger conference, that they're going to be there. And I spend a lot of my time socializing. You're on your own. You're independent. How do you, like, what are your goals for when you how do you approach a conference?
Yeah, so I try to, like, I usually have I don't have a rigid structure, but I have an outline of what I want to do. A lot of the different sessions that I focus on are more strategic and high level. I found that focusing on like technical training or like the nuts and bolts, it's too hard. There's so much energy. You're meeting a lot of people. I'm naturally an introvert, so I get all this weird energy and super hyped up when I'm around a lot of people. A lot of times there's alcohol in the mix and you're kind of tired because you're out all day and it's conference food. So I try not to overload myself from a technical perspective because it's not going to be something that I remember. I rely a lot on like taking pictures, but usually what I do is if I'm meeting someone, I really force us to go to a session together. And that really is what I think helps crystallize the information in my mind. It's one thing to go alone and observe something and walk away and have no one to talk about it with. But if you're with someone, you can talk to them during the session or be texting or doing something to help banter back and forth different ideas and really take whatever it is the speakers are doing to the next level. And I particularly, I think analytics is a lot about communication. I talk about data communication a lot. So understanding the words people use to associate with analytics is critically important. Everything from how did I get people to adopt to this? How did I get people to buy into this? What are some of those kind of scarier negative words that still keep coming up? Things about trust, things about, time. What are those buzzwords that keep showing up? But like I said, I don't spend all my time in sessions. If I am having a really good conversation with someone, I will absolutely skip a session and go spend time and hang out with someone. During the conference, I had planned on going to a session in the afternoon, and someone pulled me aside and was like, you know what, I'd really just like to have a conversation with you. And it turned into this really great moment where I was asked to be a mentor, and we just spent time talking about how to grow your career in an industry. And that's what I think conferences are so valuable for. As much as I'm a mentor to someone else, there's obviously people at that conference that can be mentors or assets for me. And that's what I make sure that when I say it's not too rigid or structured, that I spend time keeping my eyes and ears open for those opportunities.
You mentioned you're an introvert, so I think that's like one of the hardest things is an introvert who goes to a conference and you think, okay, here are these people on a podcast, they're chatting. They're definitely not introverts. They're spending their time kind of getting information out there. How do you go about meeting new people if that's how you classify yourself? Like that, I think that's a hard thing for people, is introducing themselves to new people. And maybe this isn't a question, maybe it's just like a general note of like, that's a hard thing to do. But I think in the end, there's a lot of people who feel the same way. So when you just do reach out, maybe that's like something you need to do.
Yeah, so I have a couple tactics, right? One of them is like, I'm much more able to express my intentions on like Twitter or something. So I'll feel much more confident to be like, oh my God, I'm going to the conference, come meet me. And I try to set expectations or set up meets in a digital world so that we both know, like coming face to face, it might be like awkward, but we both want to do it. That helps me kind of get over the hurdle. The other thing is I recognized a while ago that we're all there for the same reason. We love analytics. We are the nerdiest of nerdy people. We are all here because we are just so super jazzed about it. So I feel like if you communicate the enthusiasm and the energy around it, that can be a good icebreaker. It's different than like going to like a normal social gathering or a party where you're trying to find things in common, you're stuck on the weather, that kind of stuff. I mean, yes, there's a little bit of that, but really if you're just like, you know what, I went to this great session today, or what did you think of the keynote this morning, or how are you actually doing this? You're going to break the ice really quickly. And what you're going to find is that the people that you interact with, they want to interact with you just as much, and they have the same level of enthusiasm and energy. I will say that the biggest struggle that I have is people that I admire in the space. So a really good example is Chris Love. He's both an Alteryx ace and a Tableau Zen master. I went to one of his speaking sessions and I said, so he's going to know now, one of my goals was to meet him because I had never met him at a conference in person. I'd never shaken his hand. I just wanted to kind of take our digital transactions and make them physical, right? Like actually meet the guy. But I struggled so much of like, I can't go up to this guy. I admire and respect him so much that I have this big fear that he's not going to know who I am. And I have no expectations that he knows who I am. So it's like, oh, it's really weird. It's really hard. And in those situations, I try to lean on other people that I do know and feel comfortable with, because it's always easier to do things in pairs. So that goes for like swag as well. Now I'm getting off topic, but getting an Alteryx backpack by talking to a bunch of different booths at the event, not something that I would do. But I had a friend actually go with me to do that. And that gives me a lot of capability to actually do what I wanted to do. So I still struggle with that, but I think the key is just, if you want to meet someone, set it up before, or just get over that, because they're here for the same reasons. We all paid to be here. We all paid to do this cool, nerdy thing.
I think there's one thing that I want to just add to this, is that from all this, it seems like you spend a lot of time planning ahead of the conference to figure out, not necessarily in detail everything you're going to do, but you have your big high level goals set out ahead of time. Is that right? As I ask you a question as you drink some coffee?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I think it's important, right? Like with any situation, this is an investment in your time and and money, right? So you should have some goals that you want to achieve out of it. It's important. I think anyone's doing themselves a disservice if they don't go into it thinking that, if you're rolling out of bed, just like, yeah, I'm just going to go for the free alcohol and maybe I'll go to the keynote, maybe I won't. You're not really going to get anything out of it. So I think it's important, right? And again, I don't have I'm not ridiculous. I don't have a calendar every single moment of what I plan on doing. It's more generalized than that, right? And
hey, Anne, guess what?
yes,
I go in with a very loose plan of
what is your plan?
I'm going to be.
Which is get to registration.
Well, I mean, at some point you need to register. I don't think that's important to do right away. What I'm thinking of. I know there's that, but in the real basic sense, I want to connect with people. I want to find ways to make my own work better. I guess that's innovate my work. I want to share, and in general, I just want to be motivated. So that's what I go to a conference for. So I'm not going to. And I've been to a ton of conferences, so I think I don't spend a lot of time diving in deep on the details of what I'm going to do. I let the feeling and just absorb the moments of what's happening and just live in those moments at the conference, be what my driver is. And I think in that sense, I get what I want typically from a conference if I'm doing that.
So you never have any, I don't like regrets, but you don't ever have any regrets or things that you must do, or you're like, man, because there's always one or two things I'm like, I need to do these things.
In the world of everything is recorded, so it makes it so much easier to be like, well, I heard that there was a really good session and I missed that session. Guess what? Internet, pull up the session, watch the video, and I don't miss anything. I think that the interactions with other people are far more important in that sense. Sure, I would love to be in the audience supporting that individual, but I can do that afterward, and then I can share on social media that I've watched the video and also promote it for those individuals.
So what about, you mentioned you went as a sponsor to the big data one, and that you're actually looking for recruiting. Do your goals change when you're going to that type of conference? Is it the same, let me just feel out who's there, or is there more strategy and planning that goes into being there?
Yeah, so here's a completely different story. We're talking about me and my personal goals at a conference versus when you're an organization sponsoring it. It is very much different. We're going in with some very hard goals ahead of time, and individuals should be throughout the conference just in order to be sort of more present in that time. So we're going to have a set number of people at the booth. We're going to be focusing on recruiting during that time period, and we're searching for individuals with certain skill sets, whether that's going to be on data engineering or data visualization, whatever it is. We're generally seeking out a set of skills and looking for individuals. And then we're also, as a sponsor, and we'll have our clients speaking at these engagements, we also want to be present and support their work in the end, because we know them, and it's just in a professional sense they're our clients, but really at work, as you can attest, they become your friends as well. So you want to support the people that you've worked with closely over time. And I think that's the bigger thing, is that it's the relationships that we've created, and just making sure that we're supporting everybody as we go.
So then I'm going to ask you, any advice for people that are maybe attending a conference that are trying to get into a new career? They see a booth where, it's an organization that they admire, that they want to get into. What are some success stories of people that you met, or some just basic ideas or techniques for people looking to kind of branch out and expand their career?
I'm gonna lead with a don't, because this is the one thing I often see. Someone comes up, they shake your hand, they give you a business card, you have a 5-10 minute conversation. It's real high level because their main goal is to establish a very first networking relationship to eventually expand on it. And then you see them go to the next booth and they have the same conversation. And it quickly becomes, oh, that individual is just searching for a job. And so when we see individuals connecting across multiple booths, the big issue there is that we know that they're not just interested in the culture of our workplace and the meaningful relationships. They just want a job, and they'll do whatever it takes for a job. And I think spending the time to understand the organizations that you're going to be talking to ahead of time, and potentially the individuals that you're going to see there. So there's always going to be a recruiter there. So they're going to be the ones collecting information about you, but you're also going to be working with individuals that are going to be at that booth, right? So I'm there with people from my team, the team I'm on, and we're having those conversations. We have a recruiter there, understanding the real basics of what an organization does, and just being personable and trying not to like throw all your information out there and just a word vomit.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you correctly, it's be authentic, but don't go in trying to get a job. That sounds like what you guys are picking up on, and what you really look for is just people who, you know, have natural ambition, or they're really excited about doing this, and giving them that opportunity, just person to person, to connect on that level, to figure out if it's a good fit or not. Not to go in thinking, okay, this is my one chance to impress these people to get to the next level, being much more casual in the moment about it.
Yeah, I think you said that right. Just be authentic, and then just think about the interactions that are happening pre and post you arriving at that booth, and that people are being hyper aware of what's going on during that time. And after you meet someone, then they're kind of watching your sort of how you progress through the rest of the conference. So if they run into you again, they're wondering, hey, I wonder what that person was doing at this session, or I wonder what they were doing at that booth. And that's just something to be conscious of, right? You're on all the time after you've met with an organization and you're searching out for a job.
So I'm going to go a little bit I'm going to drill into this a little bit further. And, you know, a lot of times I think people struggle to figure out if it's how to tell someone, like, if they work at an organization to pay for a conference, or people trying to figure out the value of actually the monetary investment. So, you know, you said you've been to a lot of conferences. Can you talk about how it's, you know, has it impacted you in a positive way professionally? Can you give some kind of advice or tidbits or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the big thing, so it's really hard, because I think, given the transition of my experience from being someone who just does the work to someone who manages individuals, and then is also trying to lead an organization in a consulting organization, and essentially finding work, finding people, your focus has changed really quickly. It goes from, you know, what can I absorb, to how can I find, and I think for my focus on the management side is finding talent at these conferences, and that can be difficult. But there is also the side of, there's a sales team that's also out there that's trying to find potential work by making those connections. And when I say find sales, you might think, oh, there's a person, let's go talk to them and see if they have work for us. That's not at all what goes on. It's really start developing a relationship with somebody to understand what they do, and also have them understand what we do, and if there's any sort of connection, and if they really have needs, then making the connection for sales related conversation. But sales at that sort of level is just connecting with professionals across in a much more strategic sense across your profession. And that is the number one thing that any consulting organization is trying to do at a conference, in that sense, is try to understand what's going on.
I agree with what you said. My goals of going to conferences have changed over the years. The very first technical or like data conference I ever went to, I spent 99% of my time, I was like, I got to go to all the hands-on things. I got to learn how to be really good at this thing, because I need to get the skills that I need to do this job. I really want to do it. And that was just it was a very immature, I would even say, perspective of it's novice, right? It is. It's a very novice approach. So that was kind of my first perspective, you know, my first experience. And that has really changed and evolved over time. After you get your first one under your belt, you know, I much more decided it was going to be about the people. It was going to be looking around. I think a lot of this is abstraction, right? You get to see a lot of different industries at these things, a lot of different walks of life, people that are practitioners, but approach things in different ways. They call themselves different things. being able to abstract the concept of analytics is what I think has really strengthened and grown my career, and given me the capability to now go out on my own. And that's what these conferences do. It's not necessarily, I mean, there is a component of, yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to get certification
Hmm.
or you'll get hands-on, you'll see things. That's important in the early stages of the game, but really it's abstraction and keeping, seeing the bigger picture of the entire domain that we work in, that really ups your game and your skill level. And again, having conversations with people, repetitively giving your elevator pitch, seeing how people respond to you, fine tuning that. I mean, that's another communication moment. Those are all things that can really only occur
Hey,
at conferences.
I think you brought up an interesting thing, right? You practice your elevator pitch, and I think an individual watching this who's, oh, I'm an analyst at a smaller big company, and all I do is I don't consult. That's not what I do. Why should I have an elevator pitch? I think everybody should have elevator pitch for what they do. It's just great practice in understanding, uh, not even understanding, it's a great practice in being able to explain what you do to people in a concise format. And we need to be able to do that as professionals, regardless of our actual role in analytics. It spans any profession. Being able to say what you do in a concise way and practicing that, practicing the communication, that's the hard part. And I think that's right. If we're talking novice and haven't mastered that pitch yet, that's because that potentially not seeing the rationale behind having such an understanding is sort of the gap there. And I also want to add that every time I go to a conference, I still go back as a practitioner. So for me not to go see what the latest is and understand what's going on just from maybe that hour session is a gap on my part. So it's not a novice to go to those hands-on sessions. It's a novice to spend your entire time in those sessions learning just the very tactical things. And I think that's what separates a novice experience from really this meta experience.
Yeah, and I'll add on one last point, which is, I said it before, like there's people that you admire, you could call them heroes, whatever, like people that are doing things that you hadn't thought of. They become your inspiration. They become a way for you to grow. A lot of times if you are sort of static in a cube on your own, you're the only guy doing this, or you're on a small team and you're doing the same thing in and out, it can be hard, again, to break out of that box that you're sitting in. So seeing other people, how they're connecting, what it is they're doing, seeing things like, at the Alteryx conference, they have Alteryx for Good. And so they're talking about how they're impacting, young individuals globally and giving them the tools they need for analytics, and thinking back on how I can connect that to my own community or the global community. Those are powerful moments where it really strengthens you as a leader. And again, it's that meta moment. It's really abstracting from here's my job, here's what I do every day, I build these things, and thinking about it much broader.
So those meta moments are kind of like the best moments of the conference, right? I think that's the way I kind of think about them. Um, I just confession, I had a really great meta moment. And also I want to just thank Britt Kava for giving me her ticket because she couldn't make the conference for a number of reasons, but I greatly appreciate that. Let's talk about this meta moment. I luckily got to take part in a workshop technically prior to the conference, but I still think those workshops are part of the conference, right? It was led by Georgia Lupi and Stephanie Posavec, and they had a session called, and for those who might not know, they're really well known in the data visualization community. They were the group, the duo behind Dear Data, and their work is now from that is in MoMA, which is pretty cool, like that. And it's also, they're at Eyeo, and they met at Eyeo 4 years ago, and they haven't seen each other for 2 years. So this was like a really big culmination of those two coming together to essentially come up with this session, and then sort of show individuals their approach. So understanding how they go about their work to creating these non-standard data visualizations. So I think that's the big thing, is that they emphasize creating visualizations that are non-standard, but are very much grounded in data. So Stephanie and Georgia they do some crazy things, and to see their approach, they really put in the time and how they research the designs that they're going to do. They don't spend time looking at data visualization books per se. They will find art to be inspired by or the natural world and really then start to investigate it and go really, really deep into the, if they're looking at flowers, they're going to go in and understand the biology and sort of the relationships that exist within it. So they really put in their 10,000 hours on this one. By the way, that's Anders Ericsson, not Malcolm Gladwell, who came up with the 10,000 hours thing. That's a side note. Anyway, in this session, we had 7 hours to collect information about ourselves and then come up with a design and actually draw it out on a piece of paper. And we had to use our information on our cell phones, and we had to come up with a non-standard design. So I really thought this was awesome in the sense that I was able to spend time within myself thinking about how I wanted to approach solving a problem, interact manually by collecting that data on my phone, and then coming up with patterns in it and coming up with something that's non-standard. So I came up with this cloud visualization, and it's actually, I researched my photos, and they're all photos of my daughter and the different outfits she's worn from the first day she was born, her mood, and each part of the clouds kind of show tell a story about how she's progressed in her development in a very non-standard way. And if I'm going to make a nod to the upcoming Iron Viz, I might be using this as my well-being data, not just for myself, but I think it's going to be a pretty cool visualization that if I can come up with something from it. Anyway, that was my meta moment, just being able to spend time with two individuals who are well recognized in the community and seeing how they approach these problems. And I think I just want to also add that Stephanie is super, her solutioning is very, very, very matter of fact, and she just is able to quickly resolve and describe situations in a really concise format so that anybody can get a quick takeaway from that. And Georgia is just like this person who knows so much and has a deep understanding well beyond, and her ideas are well beyond anybody else's at this point. Anyway, Anne, I've said plenty. Tell me, did you have sort of a meta moment from Alteryx Inspire?
So, I mean, I had a couple really good moments. I always like looking for paradigm shifts, right? So people saying things where it is drastically changing my viewpoint of the world. And I had a couple of those at Alteryx. At Inspire, they have a Women of Analytics luncheon. So it's all the women of the conference, because it's a small conference, literally every single woman from the conference was there. It was very male dominated in terms of a conference industry. I'd say the ratio is probably 1 to 10 or 1 female to 10 or 2 to 10. So there was a sense of male dominance there, but it was really awesome to have all the women in one place. It's set up like a panel. So there's 4 or 5 panelists talking. And there were 2 things that one person said that just really resonated with me that I need to hear, that helped me grow as a person and change the way I approach people and everyday things. One was that likability is not a job requirement. I know that that's something that, you guys can hear it when I talk about how much I plan for things and what a perfectionist I am. And I always try to go into things making sure that people like who I am and the things that I'm saying. And I don't want to lose that niceness in the process. That can be difficult. And sometimes it's not required. So not everybody has to like you. Your peers don't have to like you. Your boss doesn't have to like you if you're effective in your job. That doesn't mean being a jerk or being an asshole. It just means likability is not what you are paid to do at the end of the day. So hearing that, being empowered by that concept and that mantra is really something that I need to hear over and over again. I think a lot of other women need to hear over and over again. And to some degree, to be effective, you can't always be the nicest person in the room. That's called a pushover. That means you are not leveraging the talent and the expertise that you have and everything that you bring to the table if you're just blowing over and allowing it to be, just nice and, hey, she's a really nice person. So that was one. And then the other one, and this is very similar, and this is something, again, this is very female centric is there's this quote that someone shared, which was about young girls who code. And she had gone to some event or something or read an article. And the quote that came out of it was that said girls had written beautiful, elegant code, but would rather show nothing than show something with an error. We need to break that, learn from failures. And like, even as I'm saying it, I get kind of emotional about it because it's very true from my personal experiences in the tech industry, that we're very cautious and considerate and mindful, aware. We are aware of any errors that we make. And that idea of, problem solving and working through things and constant iteration and making things better, which is the approach we should have, can get lost sometimes because we get so hung up in being right and not being embarrassed by the lack of perfection on the first try, which is just not realistic. And I think, there was this rapper that was at the conference, and he kind of said it best in terms of how we approach analytics, which is performance, feedback, revision. And that's really what I think you have to do is you have to get the feedback and you have to revise. And having that concept repeated, having the concept of like, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up and do your best. Those are moments that really continue to change my perspective. And those are my big meta moments from the conference.
That's pretty cool. Let's just jump in and most surprising moment of the conference itself.
Okay, so the last eight, the closeout keynote speaker is someone named Jane McGonigal. She built an app a game, an app to focus on changing kind of your mind. Like it's depression focused. She has a really strong personal experience associated with that. There's a quote she has. I'm trying to find it here. So kind of her stance is the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression. And so she really talked about how the art of, I mentioned it before, I'm a video gamer. I wanted the Iron Viz theme to be video games, but the concept is that playing games puts your mind in a state where you are ready to take on challenges, where you're ready to learn, where it's easier to learn. I thought that was really powerful. The other thing she said, so I'm also an avid board gamer. She said that people that board game together or video game together, they actually get in sync with one another from a body perspective. So they'll start breathing, they'll have the same heart rate. So it's much easier to empathize with people when you are collaborating on games. I think that that's something that you can take into other realms, other areas and use. So I thought that that was hugely powerful. And she had a lot of really good takeaways, like tidbits, which was like game for 10 minutes and then go do a hard job. Like, that's something that I can do. I can play Pokemon Go for 10 minutes or whatever that is to get my mind in a better frame to be able to feel like, this isn't a problem that I can't challenge. Like this is hard to tackle and I'm much more open and receptive. There's some other things like it's much easier to predict the future and predict it accurately. And so I like those benefits of that. And then I think it speaks to something that I've done in terms of how I approach my practice and my craft, and particularly to what we do with Workout Wednesday, is I like to think of them as games, as challenges, and that makes it much more fun to grow. It's not a task, it's not a chore, it's not a job. Treating it like that is really helpful. So hearing someone tell you all the positive benefits was really cool. And also to think that, depression is the opposite of play and all the terrible things that go along with depression and how much it turns your brain off to things is really huge in a world where we're trying to solve problems all the time. So that was kind of my most surprising moment. It was better than I thought it was going to be because I thought she was probably going to be high level about, kind of the experience and the game, but she gave a lot of really good takeaways. And then there's one other thing I have to say that was really surprising about it is she talked about when we think about our future selves, that person is a stranger in our minds. It's really hard for us to connect and empathize with that person. So she gave a lot of techniques on how you can empathize with your future self and make it easier to do the right things now to get to where you want to be. And I thought that was it's something I've taken away and been able to do such that now I can go to bed a little bit, earlier at night and be like, yeah, future Anne, she's going to thank you for this because of this, as opposed to like, what we typically do is like, future Anne, who cares? That's not really someone that I need to think about right now. So I like that. What about you, Luke? Surprising moments?
I actually find that's really interesting because one thing I'll often do is I'll write a note for my future self when I'm doing some coding and be like, you're welcome. And it will definitely happen where it'll be like, oh, why did I do this? Oh, this is awesome. this is perfect. This is exactly what I needed. I'm glad I took the time to whatever I did in the moment. I've had more than a dozen times this has happened in the last 5 years of my career where I'm working on something hard and I'm reviewing some old code because I know I have a snippet of it somewhere where it's going to save me time. And I run across it and there's like a little note for myself and it's like, oh, that's something that we should always, it's great to hear that's something we should always be doing. And now I need to continually reference myself in that sense of like, hey, future Luke, this is good for you. Or bad for you to be doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Nope.
Yeah, I think if I'm gonna jump back in, my most surprising moment is that I'm really picky when it comes to what I'm gonna take away from a conference. I know that I said like, hey, I don't have a set schedule, and I try to get away from that, and that helps me find the surprising and great moments. I think I went to a session at Eyeo, and that session was on the ethics of AI. And it was really interesting to hear individuals across different professions that associate with artificial intelligence and how they interact and the ethics around it. And I think there's this cognitive dissonance around, hey, everybody as an individual is trying to do the best thing possible, but no one is ever, it's not true that no one is ever, but the majority of us aren't thinking about the bigger picture of our own micro work and the intentions of the tiny little thing that we're doing. And we have to have a broader approach to that. And it was that wasn't necessarily the takeaway from the actual session itself, but it was my own takeaway that individuals who were up on stage weren't recognizing that was necessarily the case all the time. There was certainly some nitpicking on individual issues, but thinking about the broader picture is something that we often don't spend a lot of time doing. And even as professionals on a stage, that stuff like that can be missed sometimes.
I think it kind of like that sounds kind of similar to that future self. Like Jane had this, like, what would you picture your future self? And you had a smart toilet that said it was going to collect data on you if you used it. Would you be okay with that? And thinking through the implications of what it is we're doing today and how it's going to impact and shape the future of how we work, the future of how humans interact with each other, the future of privacy. Like there's a lot of big things going on in our space right now. So I think ethics is a very interesting topic that's making its way into a traditionally very technical profession.
Yeah, and the way that we approach ethics is still, as you said, it's still starting, and there's so many things for us to consider around ethics and data and our use of it, and how it ultimately affects us. I think one of the most recent examples is Google has a tool that now adds ums and ahs and pauses to make it more human-like when you're interacting with their voice service. And for some people, they're like, yeah, that's awesome. That's a really great work to be able to do that. And it sounds far more integrated and it seems like you're interacting with a human. But on the ethics side of it, we could talk about the sort of, should we be doing that, or should we be sort of, the nature of it is to share that you are interacting with a bot and having an understanding of that. Like certainly great technological breakthrough, but we haven't talked about the ethics of that sort of breakthrough at all, and that has rarely surfaced up in conversation. Anyway, let's just quickly switch topics. Anything you would change from your experience at the conference itself?
No, I living in a world of no regrets is really something that's important for me in my life. So no regrets. I think that I accomplished, as rigid as it sounded like I had from a plan going in, I do try to be very flexible in it. So I think I achieved all of my goals. There's always an opportunity for me to get stronger on that networking piece, to continue to kind of hunt down my idols or people that, I respect. It's not idol shit. It's not idolation or, hero worship. It's respect. People that I respect a great deal. That's where, some of my pause comes from. So working through that a little bit more, I think is critical for me. But that would, other than that, I was actually very happy with the way things turned out. I was very happy with the way the conference was organized, the things that I took back from it, and how I've been able to kind of actionize off of my time post conference. Some of it I like to just kind of prove it and do it and show it. I think that coming out of that conference, it gave me the confidence or the idea to go out and start tracking down Alteryx certifications. So I did one of those, which was really nice. And then it also kind of gave me the idea to be more empowered and more present in the community. Right now, my community focus is a little bit more centric into data visualization and Tableau, but recognizing that there's other tools out there and other people that I can connect to in that way. So no regrets. My big takeaways were those things, and those are the things that I will continue to work on coming out of it. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's right on. Like we have notes on this, and it just so happens that they perfectly corresponded in the sense that I think we need to my big takeaway from all this and get better at in general. And it's not from the conference itself or how I could improve my experience at the conference, really, because it's what you do afterwards. That's the what's more important. And really, how do we get ourselves out and expand beyond tool specific to a broader view? That's really hard. Really be topic based or something. Obviously, we both have a large social media presence on Twitter, particularly around Tableau. But we also both have skills well beyond that single dimension, right? I keep referencing like, hey, I have understanding of tools like AWS, GCP, Tableau, not Tableau. See, it even came out as I was saying it, but like R and Python. These are a whole set of skills. A pretty decent understanding of JavaScript and just front end programming. And we don't do ourselves justice because we don't showcase those talents as much. And I think that's what it is that we often get stuck in. We get into these tribes, and I actually tweeted about this. Like, we need to get outside of that mentality of being in a tribe, because the whole idea and reading the definition behind a tribe is something that we don't want to be a part of. That's the opposite of inclusion. So we're back on the topic of inclusion somehow here. But again, that in the end starts with us and ends with everybody else out there. Like, let's be more conscious about avoiding getting into these micro communities. We need to think broader and we need to act broader.
I think we could
Anyway,
almost we could equate that back to kind of like my conference experience. I see it as sort of like the evolution of the profession of analytics. Like right now, I said my first conference I was very novice. I was very tool focused. I was focused on learning how to do things. That's where I think we've spent a lot of effort just as communities around different tools, and as the maturity of analytics continues to grow, that's something that I think that's going to naturally happen. My last kind of thought, like one of the things I said is like, what industry attitudes are you seeing coming out of this conference? And one of the big ones at the Alteryx conference is that the idea of a citizen data scientist, and it's not about like using the right tools to build mathematical models or algorithms or bringing it in from that perspective. It's about enabling someone to do powerful analysis, whatever the platform is, and the notion that that's going to exist in the future, and that data science isn't reserved for someone that wears a lab coat and has a PhD and is super nerdy, right? Like it could be that guy, but it doesn't have to be that guy. It can be, just like the crafty data analyst. So I think that you're right. I don't think it's something that we should blame ourselves for. I think it's just where we are in terms of the maturity for this space, and something that I hope continues to evolve. I think us going to these different types of things, like one that's tool based, one that's, much more design oriented, and even one that's sort of adjacent where it is like the whole, what is it called, microservices, where it's just talking about all the different like cloud platforms that are associated with big data. Having that awareness around all of them and having these conversations is what's going to continue to progress us into that space where it is more meta, it's more abstracted, and we're all talking about the same thing independent of tool.
yeah, and I think that whole notion of citizen data scientists is a really, maybe I'm bringing up the wrong topic at this point, but I feel like that is a very difficult notion to get to, which requires all of us to continually grow our skills to be able to appropriately do that sort of work or automate that type of work. It requires individuals, companies that are trying to do that, to have a broader understanding of the underlying data that we're working with in order to make the appropriate assumptions and push those to individuals. So there's a lot of work, again, as our community grows, to make, I think, like the overarching idea of citizen data scientists is a great idea if we can get there.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it takes time, right? Like certainly, math and qualitative approaches are really important, but doing it appropriately and applying it appropriately is critical. Part of that, I think, is the responsibility of these technology creators to make it easy and intuitive and to guide users through that process. That's where I think we are in the evolution, right? um,
Cool. Yeah.
Anything else? Anything? What were your big takeaways? Any kind of industry attitudes that you got out of either of these experiences that you want to share?
Yeah, so back to Stephanie Posovic, she had a couple of really great quotes that really resonated with me. With the first one that I wrote down, I heard it when I heard it. She said, "Data visualization has been siphoned off from general communication design," and to me, that really hit home. Before I went to the conference, I worked with not just in data analytics, but across a larger organization that does a number of different things. And a digital strategist, when he found out that I was going, gave me like a really weird look and asked why I was going. It just didn't make sense. That conference was for designers, and it's stuff like that that kind of frustrates me. It's visual for whatever reason. Data visualization gets that bad rap, and right, the website itself, Eyeo's website says machine learning, artificial intelligence, and and data visualization. So it's not like we don't fit into that space. It's explicitly written in there, and yet individuals that I work with and individuals across, and that person is not a single kind of one-off. It definitely is something that is perceived across communication design. That data visualization is just something completely different, and it's not. It's part of that process, and how can we make that more inclusive is really difficult. The other one is a little more lighthearted in its seriousness. Stephanie also had a great quote that just said, "Chart Twitter is a very serious place," and I think that it certainly rings true. We often are. We've talked about this a million times about the criticisms that we receive, and I think I I try to take and lighten things up, and I think that even with our workout Wednesdays that we're doing, so workout-wednesday.com, we had like a cat emoji map to try to keep things lighthearted, even though we generally keep it more business focused. There's that occasional let's keep things more fun, because it is a very serious place. For whatever reason, chart Twitter, you need to lighten up.
Like I've gotten you now like on the cat emoji train because like, again, you go back to like, feedback and iteration. Like that's what that space is for. It is, in my mind, the way to connect professionals and to grow together. So you shouldn't take yourself too seriously. It's great that people remind us not to take things too seriously. It's not, a scrapbook of your best moments and your best things of all times. The way you get the most out of it is being authentic and being vulnerable to not always being right, and growing and learning from that, and taking feedback as critiques that you don't necessarily have to do or not do, and realizing, I mean, Luke does this for me all the time, is that people are people. Like they have opinions are not always right, and they're not always informed. So keeping that in mind in Twitter, and keeping it casual, I think is hugely appropriate. I like that.
And sometimes I just take the opposite opinion, just one for. I think everybody should think about how other people are approaching it, even if it to you it's wrong. Just thinking about it, and sometimes taking that approach um, and making mistakes, so that you do show that you're human. And that's part of the whole reason I do that. Sometimes it's just in order to kind of push people in their thinking, whether it's one way or another. Um, that said, we're going to start wrapping up here. And what are you working on right now? I just want to kind of.
Professionally or for fun? So,
Yeah, either or, just kind of like a high level. What are you working on right now? What's on your computer for fun?
Yeah, so for fun, I'm working on building out a portfolio of, I know sounds kind of lame, but like of business dashboards that people can look at. I think that I'm really drawn to multifaceted analytical displays, and having real demonstrations of analytics in the organization. A lot of that is closeted. So I'm trying to abstract some of that and share it. That's been a big push for me recently. And then, I'm already starting to think about, I know we weren't going to talk about it, but I'm starting to think about Iron Viz, and I have about 3 years worth of quantified self data that I feel like I have to get in there. So those are the two big things on my mind. So I've shared what I'm working on. Luke, what are you working on right now?
Yeah, so after the conference, I decided to dive back into my machine learning and sort of, I've been really digging some of the artificial intelligence stuff gone bad. So I'm trying to make some of the artificial intelligence stuff gone bad. So I'm doing like some of lyric analysis of different artists that have a deeper discography so that I can sort of make up mock lyrics. And it's really easy to come up with stuff that's kind of super funny. I had a couple tweets out of I was doing some analysis of Jay-Z lyrics, and I just had a couple like quick quotes from it, and it's just kind of funny what it comes up with. And it comes up with, it sort of learns the patterns of words really quickly, with no problems. But then obviously making coherent strings is very difficult. But occasionally, like you land on a string that makes sense. And I had one where it was like it was making fun of the fact that it was doing artificially generated lyrics. It somehow out of luck it came up with that. So it was just like, oh, this is kind of funny and humorous. So just very meta in the moment. And let's just wrap this up. In 2 weeks, we're talking books and resources for the data practitioner. This has been #analytics, and you can reach out to us on Twitter to continue the conversation at Luke Stanky, at Anu Jackson. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, guys.
We see individuals that are connecting across multiple booths. It seems like, give it a second. Where was I trying to cut this back in for you, Josh? We go 15 seconds.
We're going so meta now. Josh, we're thinking about you.
Still a loser. There you go. There's your cut you need.